are there specific ways that we can see that AI can help physicians in that learning process?
Yes is the definite answer. You can engage these chatbots to become a tutor. So you can say, I'm a physician in practice. I practice critical care, and what's new in my specialty this year?
Well, welcome to the Hat Rack. It's Bill McCauley again, the Associate Dean of Continuing Professional Education at the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry. And for the first time ever, I'm joined remotely by Leslie McAdam. How are you doing, Leslie?
Hi, I'm here in London, Ontario. It's morning. It's a beautiful day. And I'm at my office at Western University.
Yeah, very good. Okay. Well, we've never done this remotely. I feel like all of me's not here. I don't know what we're going to do.
Well, the media suite looks great. And who do you have with you in the media suite?
Well, that's a good question. So we have with us today Dr. Robert Arnfield. Rob is someone that I've known for a long time and happy to call a friend for a long time. He's an ICU physician, intensive care physician, and the medical director of the Critical Care Trauma Center at the London Health Sciences Centre here in London, Ontario. He's also just quite recently a professor of medicine. Congratulations. He got promoted to full professor. I was at the ceremony where he received his certificate. And he specializes in point-of-care ultrasound, did a fellowship in New York City some years ago, and authored a key textbook on POCUS. And the creator of a website that people should check out called westernsono.ca. It's got lots of great resources about ultrasound. But Rob's not here because of his POCUS expertise. He's here because he has also become involved in some projects related to artificial intelligence. So, Leslie, we're going to talk about AI today, which is a very hot topic, I think. What do you know about AI?
I actually don't know very much at all.
Okay,
so I'm here to learn. And I'm trying to be open to the learning. So hopefully I'll hear some strategies or recommendations maybe of how to get into it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome, Rob. Welcome to the Hat Rack.
Thank you for having me, Bill and Leslie. It's great to be here.
Now, I just want to say that this, you have to understand that our audience for the Hat Rack are physicians in practice. We're not academics. We are sort of the hard hat wearing, orange vest wearing doctors that might need a little bit of help in understanding what some of this AI stuff is. So you have to go easy on us a little bit with the terminology. Have I stop you from time to time to get a better understanding of what you mean by something you use? That's just because we don't understand this stuff.
Okay,
all right.
Understood.
Yeah, I've known Rob for a long time, and it's just sort of one of the things that happens in life is that as we've both grown older, he's gotten smarter and I've gotten dumber. I think that's just the way life tends to work, unfortunately. What do you think, Leslie?
Well, I don't really know Rob very well. I've only worked with him a little bit on the POCUS projects.
That's right. He's a very smart guy.
I have to stay neutral. I can't say.
He's going to learn us good about AI. Okay, so let's get into it, Rob. What is this all this hype about AI? It seems like wherever you go, not just in medicine, but in other areas, that all you're hearing about is we're on the new frontier of artificial intelligence. What is all the hype about?
Yeah, the hype is probably well-founded, I think many people would say, in 2023. And I just want to back up and maybe a little bit and explain how I became in a position to speak to you at all about this topic. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I felt the hype was hitting fever pitch at that point and sought to understand it the same way I think your listeners and maybe you all are seeking to understand it today. And I just have a bit of a head start, but ultimately no individual is a domain expert on this very vast topic. But the themes of AI have been around for ages. If anyone's seen The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch and back to the Turing days, and artificial intelligence was really sort of intellectually coined around that time. But recently there's been sort of the collision of a few different things that have allowed it to really germinate. And so one would be the massive amounts of data that are now widely available in online capacity. So think of your Facebook photos, think of your Instagram posts, think of your emails, your Reddit posts, if you ever post on Reddit. The computational power is is extraordinary, mostly powered by things called GPUs. If anyone's looking to have a good side business, you can sell those out of the trunk of your car for a good premium.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to stop you there and say, what's a GPU?
So not to get too hard into the hardware piece, but the GPU, interestingly, is the graphics processing unit that drives the ability, the visual ability of computers and computational systems, including like video game systems, to play video games primarily, and that they happen to contain sort of the jet fueled powered processors that are actually the backbone also of a lot of the AI capacity we're now seeing, with the processing times now being substantially shorter. And so if anyone follows their stock portfolios, I expect many of your listeners do, the NVIDIA stock, a company that primarily makes GPUs, is up about 500% over the past couple of years because they make the picks and shovels that are driving the AI revolution, as it were.
Gotcha. Okay, disclaimer, we are not suggesting you go out and buy NVIDIA stock.
Fair enough. Yeah, we are not. I don't think we're licensed to give financial advice on this.
Fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the data, the computing processing, and then the algorithms themselves. So like the mathematical backbone of what these, what the secret sauce is, has actually been around for a long time. Probably, I mean, the neural network is the term you might hear a lot about. It's kind of the fundamental sort of backbone of most contemporary AI systems that you'll hear about, which really unleashed the current revolution. And that was described mathematically by a prof in Toronto about 20 years ago in the pages of Nature, but it could never come to fruition until the other elements of the data and the computational power caught up. And so all of that has been there's been like this potential energy just waiting to be released. And we're sort of now at that inflection point, I would say, where while it's been, if you've been an expert in the field or a computer scientist, you've been waiting for this, but it's been long coming. And now, as the lay public, we're now the experiencers and consumers of this technology very rapidly. Obviously. Things have changed very rapidly over the past 12 months, even since, especially accelerated by the release of ChatGPT, which is sort of a household name these days.
Great.
Yeah, let's skip ahead. Let's hear some examples. So right now, like in medicine, how is AI being used?
So the AI, I'd say, is being used and deployed less than it's being studied, I would argue. There's a lot of excellent research and technology out there. I still think the cultural fit with organizations, with individual physicians, is still being explored and, is going to be sort of done site by site or even country by country with different levels of comfort. But the exciting applications, which are at various stages of deployment or maturity, really fall under kind of three domains. One would be computer vision domains. So think of radiology would be the classic example where computers can automatically detect patterns in CT scans or X-ray or ultrasound images and accelerate either diagnosis, allow for automated diagnosis, or improve workflow. So that's one area which I think is the most promising and probably the most mature in many ways. The other domains would include robotics, which would be more generally applicable towards things like surgery. And you might also think of natural language processing as the term NLP you might hear, which is really just the intelligent use of language, which has broad applications to things like obviously charting and some of the administrative aspects of medicine. And I guess the last one would be sort of what I consider like the big analytics. So taking massive amounts of tabular data, like a patient's chart, for instance, or vital signs in the moment, and doing live analysis of looking for patterns. The same way AI might look for patterns of fraudulent activity in a banker's portfolio, they would apply that to a chart or or even a healthcare system level and evaluate for problematic events that might be on the horizon for patients.
So one of the other things that Rob's involved with is a medical technology company called Deep Breathe, and I believe that company is developing software that will enable someone to enable a computer to analyze a POCUS image, starting out with the lung. So is that an example of a type of application for AI that physicians in the front lines might actually see? They use a probe, put it on, computer says there's pulmonary edema there, or there's a pleural effusion there.
Yeah, no, precisely. And so that's my interest in particular is merging my interest in AI and you're already described my expertise in ultrasound. And exactly the idea is to try and put my brain or expertise with ultrasound in the machine itself through these AI models, which can have vast implications again towards simplifying workflows, towards upskilling physicians, lots and lots of exciting applications.
So how's that different? For decades, we've seen ECGs that get printed out with an interpretation on them, which we all know may or may not be correct, right? So we always teach our trainees don't follow what the ECG interpretation is. How is it different from what you're doing from what we've seen for a long time, or is it just more an evolution of that process, a refinement of that process?
Yeah, it's I'd say it's a little bit of both. I mean, so the ECGs are non-learning models. They are sort of complex systems that basically have if this then that kind of hard-coded into their algorithm. So if it sees if it perceives an ST segment that is above a certain level, it will always generate the same prediction over and over again. Whereas there's a variability to artificial intelligence where it's fed the same input, it might produce a slightly different output because it's learning and being refined as things go along. And so there's a static nature to those systems. But ultimately, the mimicry, to not get caught up in the weeds of the terminology, but the mimicry of human intelligence is really anything that AI is. So the contemporary AI is again just extremely exciting, more exciting than ECG analysis in its former form. We're eventually going to see better and better versions of that analysis because they'll learn on the go. Whereas those systems are the same algorithms that have been in the ECG machine, say since you bought the machine 10 years earlier. So it's a static versus dynamic thing, I think, is the most important distinction there.
Great. So this podcast is geared towards physicians in practice to help them to plan and implement their own CME so that they can make changes in their practice to ultimately improve the health of their patients. Are there specific ways that we can see that AI can help physicians in that learning process more than just doing stuff for us?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think yes is the definite answer. The most obvious way I would think about doing this, just to get right to the elephant in the room, which I think really for everybody, and I want this podcast to not just be about ChatGPT and what's called a large language model, and the subsequent sort of spin-offs, which most major companies are working on, tech companies, but you can engage these chat bots, these chat GPT, the chat part, to become a tutor for you, which is a really fascinating thing to be able to do. So you can say, I'm a physician in practice. You can write what's called a writing prompt. For those who haven't used ChatGPT, you type it in like you were writing it, like you were emailing it or having a old school bulletin board conversation for the early days of the internet, for those who remember that. And say, I'm a physician in practice. I practice family medicine or pathology or critical care, and what's new in my specialty this year, or I'm struggling to understand the distinction between these drug classes or antimicrobial coverage, you can then banter. Can you tutor me on this? And then it'll say sure. And release give you a series of information points. You can ask it to play a game with you and say, well, ask me some questions and see if I can get them right. You can ultimately turn it into the tutor that you might have wished you could have had at various stages of your practice. And the discretion and the anonymity of that is also something I think for those in practice is kind of nice. I mean, there's obviously a social element to regular CME events, the conference world, but truthfully, the ability to seek out contemporary resources and interact with it is perhaps the most compelling part of this technology. And as enterprises, like say a medical school, for instance, learn to collaborate with these technologies, the possibilities then become very exciting. You take experts in medical education with sort of this chat and interactive technology, and imagine the kind of resources that those who focus on CME products can produce. I think will be very exciting. It will not resemble anything like what we've seen before.
It's funny you mentioned that intersection between medical educators and the technology. I was just at a conference Monday, Tuesday this week called the National Accreditation Conference, which is really of interest to people who provide CPD. And there's a fellow there from Quebec named Martin Tremblay, and he is a researcher that works for the essentially the French equivalent of the Royal College. It's the Federation of Medical Specialists of Quebec. And they have developed a course which is completely has come from generative AI. So all aspects of the course, the planning, the implementation, the evaluation, they developed the entire course through technology and without the expertise or the input of experts in the field. So it's sort of a real life example of how technology is sort of moving medical education.
Wow, it's exciting.
So with like moving forward and seeing things on the horizon, you mentioned a few things about like how educators could use it, how you could use it for CME. Do you have any wild predictions of what you might see in the future?
Wild predictions. I mean, wow, you're kind of putting me in risky territory here. Yeah, I think, I mean, I think a lot of what we see in the future will be related to cultural acceptance. But I think, just what we are seeing, remember, is production level things that are currently being released. And so it doesn't, as you might imagine, whatever's actually behind the veil and behind closed doors in some of these organizations for AI is even more sophisticated. So, but based on current trends, I would say the computational power we're seeing and the intelligence of these systems, especially the transformer technology, the T in ChatGPT is for transformers, and those are sort of the newest architectures of AI and algorithms that basically are mimicking this hyperhuman intelligence. I think how that will relate to personalized medicine with genomics and with pharma is probably quite extraordinary. Really going well beyond what the human mind can even comprehend. That'll have just, I think, really exciting applications. Not an area of expertise for me at all. However, again, the limits of the human brain are non-trivial as it relates to looking for patterns, and so I think, the opportunity to enslave the AI to help us with those challenges. And the other piece that I find really interesting, which is part of the reason I actually got into sort of some of the imaging work that I'm doing, is this concept called radiomics, Leslie. And so what that relates to is that we as humans, it's an area of computer vision, so looking at an image, and we need pixels to be on an image to be sort of next to each other to form patterns to be able to stand out and to create meaningful information. And whereas so we can see patterns when they're sort of macroscopic, but a computer doesn't see anything. It sees a pixel instead of seeing the blue of my shirt or the black behind us. It sees a signal intensity, so a brightness, and it sees and that's a number, and then it also has numbers across the red, blue and green spectrum. And so it's a quantitative analysis. And so what that can do is it allows it to look for mathematical patterns in images. And I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. And so when you detach sort of the cognitive bias of the symmetry of the drape behind us or the shape of someone's eye or whatever, you can find patterns that are actually incomprehensible to humans because you're ingesting these things over and over and if patterns emerge over thousands or millions of examples, you can learn things that no human can tell. And so an example would be that is an active area of research in this radiomics field would be, is there a way to tissue type cancer patterns on CT images? Not just by their patterns, it looks like a small cell versus a non-small cell lung cancer, but actually, the in the details, the confidence level that it's a particular pathology type spares biopsies and would lead directly to therapy, for instance. And so that kind of confidence that is, again, quantitatively driven, not sort of thumb in the air, well, it looks a little bit like this or that, I think stands to be a huge improvement on, morbidity as it relates to malignancies and cancer and that whole process. But think of even some more basic examples, like what's the composition of your kidney stones? So that kind of, that superhuman kind of stuff that being introduced, I'm really intrigued by that. And I think we're going to, talk more about the implications of all of this for what's a physician to do in the post-AI era. But, that's a great example where collaborating with the AI will yield sort of more exciting prospects for patients and physicians.
So that's exactly where I want to go next, because I can people probably don't understand this, but I can actually see our listeners right now, and I can see our listeners' heads spinning as they're thinking about this sort of stuff. And they're thinking, am I going to be replaced by a computer? And so how do you see the role of the physician evolving over time, given the fact that we can't possibly compete with the computational power that you're describing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fabulous question. So obviously we've had practice with this, right? We've any physician in practice, depending on your age, it's either been it's been the advent of the Palm Pilot, circa 2000s. So all of a sudden, what made a great doctor in the 50s, let's say? I expect it was some amount of information recall and all the human factors, but the intelligence factors were high on display. The textbooks weren't widely available. There was it was a gilded sort of discipline where you'd get them as part of a medical school. The lay public had no access to medical jargon, had no access to the information, and certainly had no access to the medical experience you accrue as a clinician. And then you move through as technology evolves, and certainly the personal digital assistant era, and obviously the internet as a whole, we no longer had sort of this monopoly on the medical knowledge, and it was more widely available, and it led to a whole bunch of I think negative, unfairly negative attitudes towards patients who would Google their symptoms, appreciating that they have a lot of skin in the game, and that's a fair use of the available technology to them. No different than the doctor's book of home remedies in the 80s or some other resource. And so I think this is the evolution of the uncoupling of intellectual knowledge as physicians from all of the other things that physicians do. And, I think that's probably not a difficult thing to imagine for any students going through medical school today. However, it might be difficult for physicians already in practice whose pride is in their knowledge and how hard they had to work to get the knowledge that they have, and to know that knowledge is frankly now widely available and perhaps even frankly being surpassed through an easy-to-access automated platform like a large language model. The secondary real question, though, as we record this in the bricks and mortar of a one of Canada's finest medical schools, is what are the implications for how we train physicians? Because I'm not sure medical schools have fully caught up to the internet yet, and this is probably bigger than the internet in terms of the impact on human cognition and on professional information being fully democratized. And so I think that's I think going to determine how this plays out is how the medical school is going to adjust. And medical schools aren't known for their agility, let's just say, and there's good reason for that. But this technology is powerful, and I think universities, whether the medical school or elsewhere, are all kind of figuring out what this means for education in general, as knowledge is no longer a scarce commodity.
Well, it's interesting. For 20 years now, the Royal College and in more recent years, the College of Family Physicians have used CanMeds, and almost exclusively there's been a focus on the medical expert role within that. And in fact, residency programs in medical schools have often struggled to find learning opportunities in some of the non-medical expert roles. And you would think that as time goes on, those are the things that are going to define the physician, not the medical expertise part of it, but the communicator, the advocate, the collaborator, all those sorts of things in CanMeds that are being looked at again to CanMeds 2025 as important. So it'll be fascinating to watch over time how that evolves.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. We haven't unglued ourselves from the medical expert stuff, because knowing stuff is fun and learning things is fun. And as a student, so if knowledge is no longer the craft, if let's say, everyone's got a doctor with an IQ of 180 in their pocket, then what is the craft?
Right.
Well, it's all of the other petals on the flower, if it's still a flower in Cammons. I'm not sure. Is it still a flower?
Still a flower.
Yeah, okay, great. But how do you develop communication and empathy and these things? Well, that's called experience. But how do you get experience? So it's really kind of it's going to be hard for young physicians because ultimately you're not going to be any smarter than the patients coming in, and you may not have a lot of clinical experience to offer, which is really, I think, where all those things come in. Like, I'm a much better clinical communicator than I was when I was initially training under you. But the point is that I think, and I guess as a, again, the educator that you are, I mean, if I can flip am I allowed to ask questions? Like, what do you see? Like, if you no longer have a knowledge advantage and you're 26-year-old fresh out of medical school physician, like, what do you bring to the table?
Right. I think what it's going to do is force the hand of admissions processes to take a hard look at things beyond an MCAT score and a GPA in terms of allowing people in, because that unfortunately still is the bar that gets you to the interview for many, many different institutions. And I think the things that patients have been looking for are people that can communicate with them, people that can empathize with them, people that can console them when there's a problem, and they expect that medical expertise is going to be there anyway. So, in my former life as working for a medical regulator, we saw that the majority of the problems that came through were not related to medical expertise, but were related to physician behavior. And so, I think all of this technology is going to force us to take a good hard look at the behavioral aspects of who's getting into medicine and how they're nurtured as they shepherd this medical expertise, through the system.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that you'd like to see the MCAT go away.
Well, I would have said that a long time ago.
Interesting. And well, again, that's the lack of agility of the medical schooling complex. How do you filter the thousands of interested people?
The easy stuff is easy and the hard stuff is hard, right? And the hard stuff is how do you select from 2,000 or 3,000 really capable candidates, and do that through the lens of behavior and professionalism. Doing that is very, very difficult. Using a number from a GPA or from an MCAT score is an easy first filtering mechanism. So,
if only there was an AI that could perhaps filter those things.
Oh, if only.
If only. You can see where this is going.
Okay, so as the title suggests, the podcast means give listeners something to hang their hat on. So we want people to have some takeaway points for this podcast. This is a topic that we haven't even begun to scratch the surface on clearly, and it's one that is going to be it's going to be a story for a long, long time. But for now, can you give us 3 things that you can think of that people should hang their hat on in terms of what they can or should be doing with AI in 2023?
Yeah, I would say for physicians or even non-physicians, my answers might be the same, because I think whether you're a parent or a child or a physician, I mean, fluency in this space is desirable and it's available. And so gaining fluency is as simple as, downloading the ChatGPT app or on your phone, or going to the website, creating a free account and start typing in things and see how it works. You have to interact with it. Think of the first time, many of you, again, who would remember, who are over the age of 40, would remember the first time when the internet was a new thing. You typed in www something, and you kind of had an awe moment. So if you haven't had that awe moment as a listener, please go to one of the large language models like ChatGPT would be the most developed, and play around with it. If you haven't, you must. And so because otherwise this is all theoretical, and so you gotta dip your toe in that ocean. So that's very basic. So you can have dinner table conversations and the like. I think gaining some fluency in the medical applications of AI for your particular field would be advisable, so that again you can be part of the conversation. There's that expression. I think if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. The other very computer specific version of that expression is program or be programmed, which I quite like, which is a hat tip to an author named Douglas Rushkoff, who I like. But again, the idea being be part of this conversation, figure out what are the applications in your domain, and surely one of them will benefit you and perhaps even be an area of interest for you. There's a ground floor effect right now. No one's particularly a master of this domain, as evidenced by me speaking with some degree of authority to you as somebody who picked this up 5 years ago. So there's a chance if you're a family physician or an ophthalmologist or a dermatologist or whatever, there's probably not that many people in front of you, whether you're in a community practice or academics, who are active in this space. And so, I would really encourage you to hop on, again, ChatGPT or just the internet in general, or you can pick up a book like a generic medicine and AI book. There's one by Eric Topol called Deep Medicine, which is outdated now a little bit. It's only a couple years old because this field is moving fast, but it's a nice overview.
So do you have one more thing that you can give us to hang your hat on?
Yeah, the one thing I love for physicians everywhere, especially amid, I think, administrative burden and talk of burnout, which is putting some of these tools to use for to solve some of your desk work or administrative work. Appreciating that you want to keep confidentiality off of these confidential information out of these platforms, but things like if you're in the academic space and are in the habit of having to write reference letters. Those can be easily generated. A good first draft can be generated with these platforms, the ChatGPT large language models, which is just it gets things to be a bit easier. Any kind of request for, if you're in the academic space, again, grant writing, these kind of things are all being simplified, and it really takes the barrier to entry out of some of that work that is otherwise kind of nuisance work and can be the difference between staying late at the office or there on a weekend to fill out some forms or do some of these things. And so I'd say really make it your friend to kind of take some of that grunt work out of medical practice, so you can get back to what you hopefully really still enjoy doing, which is seeing the patients and communicating and empathizing and hitting all the non-medical expert petals of the flower.
Right. That's great. So don't fight it. Use it. Use it to get some more efficiency in your life and maybe to free up some time so you can go golfing. Well, thank you, Rob, for joining us today. It has been humbling to hear about AI and fascinating. I'm certainly happy that I'm going to be watching this from the other side of the stretcher in the future, because what the future looks like in medicine is, at this point to me, almost unrecognizable compared to what I've been through. And so it's going to be fascinating to watch. And I think the world is a better place having people like you shepherd us through this. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Bill. That's very generous. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming out.
So
Leslie, what did you think of that?
Well, I kept thinking about the barriers to change situation that, physicians should be reflecting on, or anyone, right, in their learning journeys. But I'm thinking I think there's a learning friction, right? The recommendations are great. Just go and try it, interact with it, stay open-minded to the AI experience. And it can be used in so many different things that it might lead you somewhere else. But we know it's here to stay. It was mentioned that it's subscribe for free. It's not one of the things where you're going to learn and then, in 7 days, you're going to have to pay a boatload of money to keep learning that tool, right? It's going to be most likely a lot of cases a free tool. So that's a good opportunity to keep learning, and then how you can use it for practice, but also to learn.
I hope it doesn't come across too harsh, but I think the other thing is a reality check for physicians, just helping us to understand that, we are our intellectual capabilities and our knowledge levels as individuals is going to be replaced. So let's think about those things that are important to patients outside of that, those things that patients really want: to be able to connect with you as a person, to be able to trust you, to be able to respect you, to be able to collaborate with you and get some empathy from you. Those are the things that maybe people should be focusing on. How can I improve those sorts of things? And that sounds to me like a topic for a future podcast.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, definitely that we're on the right track, I think. And experience was mentioned, but there's so many different ways to get experience, right? It doesn't always have to be calculated by years.
Right. Okay, well, thank you. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to The Hat Rack, hosted by Dr. Bill McCulley and Leslie McAdam from Continuing Professional Development at the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry at Western University in London, Ontario, Canada. Technical assistance for The Hat Rack is provided by Patrick Barfoot, Technology Support Specialist at Schulich. Original music was composed by Cameron Beresnick. Please contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics or guests. We can be contacted by email at thehatrack, that's all one word, THEHATRACK @uwo.ca. Additional episode information can be found online at www.schulich.uwo.ca/CPD. For The Hat Rack, I'm Stephanie Giberson-Kirby, Faculty Development Specialist at the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry, leaving you with something to hang your hat on.